I knew it was going to be a disaster the moment I walked through the auditorium doors. A woman sat in row A, seat 1, legs crossed like she owned the place. My daughter's name was on the program in her lap. That seat was not hers. It was mine. I had paid for it in cash 12 months earlier with the venue coordinator who still remembered my face. My daughter earned that front row. She survived a custody battle, 2 years of therapy, and a father who forgot her 18th birthday to take his new wife to Cancun. I had spent $30,000 and 200 hours planning the day she would finally feel seen. And now a stranger sat in the only seat I had asked the world to save for me. In the next hour, you will hear how a quiet, careful woman dismantled a man's entire life, one receipt at a time, and you will find out what was really in that handbag. Welcome back, friend. I am so glad you are here. What you're about to hear is a true first-person story, told by the woman who lived it. There is no shouting in this story. There is no violence, no scandal, no crying in the car scene. There's only a careful mother who refused to let her daughter's biggest day become someone else's photo op. Settle in, this one is going to take a while, and it is going to be worth every minute. My name is Ivy. I am 41 years old. I work as a financial controller for a mid-sized architecture firm in Denver. And for the last 6 years, I have been the kind of mother who keeps a spreadsheet of every school event, every birthday, every recital her daughter has ever attended. I keep it because my ex-husband David does not. I keep it because no one else will. On the morning of May 31st, 2024, I woke up at 5:45 and stood in front of my closet for a long time. Sophie was graduating from high school that afternoon. We had been planning this day for almost a year. I had paid for the venue, the catering, the photographer, the dress, the cake, the flowers. I had also paid for 4 seats in row A, directly in front of the stage, with clear sight lines to the podium. I had paid for them so that the people who had actually shown up for my daughter could sit in them. There was a place for my mother, a place for my brother, a place for my best friend Camille, who had driven 9 hours from Kansas. And there was a place for me in seat 1 so that when Sophie's name was called, I would be the first face she saw. David's name was not on any of those 4 seats. I had not invited him. He had not asked to be invited. He had in fact told me 6 weeks earlier, in a text I still have saved, that he and his wife would not be coming to graduation because they had a resort booking in Mexico. I had read that text at my desk, in my office, with the door closed. I had read it twice. Then I had locked my phone, opened my laptop, and confirmed the catering count for 312 guests. I did not cry. I had not cried about David in a long time. Vanessa, his wife, had other ideas. I did not know that yet. On that morning, I only knew that my dress was navy blue, that my heels were 2 inches, that my mother would arrive at noon, and that my daughter deserved a day where every person in her front row had earned their seat. I made coffee. I drank it black, standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the folder I had labeled in a black marker the week before. The folder said simply, Sophie. Inside it were the seating chart, the receipts, the email confirmations, the contract with the venue, the contract with the photographer, the catering order, the order of the speeches, and a single unsigned letter from my lawyer that I had been carrying for 8 months like a loaded gun. I had not decided yet whether to use it. The day had not earned it. Or so I thought. The night before, I had laid out my dress on the bed. I had pressed it. I had set the earrings next to it. I had put a fresh battery in the small recorder I keep in my bag, the one I use for parent-teacher conferences and difficult phone calls. I do not record Sophie. I record the men who have tried to take her from me. Before I turned the lights off, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does when it is me. I asked her if she remembered the year Sophie lost the spelling bee and how David had not come. She said, very quietly, that she did. I told her I loved her. She told me she was proud of me. Neither of us said anything else. At 6:45 that morning, I slid my keys into my bag, walked down the stairs, and started the car. The seat I had paid for was waiting. What I did not know as I pulled out of the driveway was that by 7:15, the woman who had decided to sit in it would change the entire shape of my revenge. I need to take you back. 6 years earlier, to the night I learned that my marriage was already over, even though my husband was still sleeping in our bed. It was a Wednesday. I had come home late from a closing. Sophie was 11, asleep with a flashlight under the covers. David was in the kitchen, his laptop open, his coffee cold. He did not look up when I walked in. I set my briefcase on the counter, opened the fridge for water, and that is when I saw her name. It was on a text banner at the top of his screen. The name was Vanessa Hart. The message was 3 words. It said, I miss you." I did not scream. I did not throw the water. I closed the fridge, walked to the sink, and washed my hands. I have always washed my hands when I do not know what else to do. Then I went upstairs, took off my work clothes, and put on the gray t-shirt David had bought me for our 10th anniversary. I made 3 decisions before I slept. The first was that I would not say a word to David that night. The second was that I would not let him see me cry. The third was that I would find out everything I could about Vanessa Hart before I told anyone that my marriage was bleeding out in his inbox. The next morning, I drove to my office before he woke up. I am a financial controller, which is a polite way of saying I read fine print for a living. Within 90 minutes, I knew that Vanessa Hart was 29. She lived in Broomfield, 23 minutes from our house. She worked at the same real estate firm David had been courting for 6 months. She was the marketing director. They had been messaging for at least 4 months. There was a calendar event titled D-Inner that Friday. I did not need to know everything. I needed to know enough. By Friday, I had hired a lawyer. Her name is Sharon Kaufman. She does not raise her voice. She has not lost a custody negotiation in 9 years. Sharon looked at the screenshots, looked at the joint account statements, looked at the calendar invite, and said 4 words. She said, "You have leverage." I did not ask what she meant. David had been unfaithful in the marriage that had produced our daughter, and in our state, that was not gossip. It was an asset. Sharon told me what to print, what to forward to my private email, and what to leave on the shared laptop. She told me to keep a notebook by the bed, dated, with 3 columns. The first was for what David said. The second was for what he actually did. The third was for what I had spent that day to keep Sophie fed and on time. I have every notebook from that year in a box in my closet, in order, with the months written on the spines in the same black marker I used for the Sophie folder. I did not confront David. I needed to be quiet. I needed to be patient. And I needed him to keep being exactly the man he had decided to be. A man who texts another woman, "I miss you," from the kitchen counter while his wife is in the next room is not a man who's going to suddenly become careful. The screen would do my work for me. I filed for divorce on a Monday. I did not tell Sophie until the following Saturday at a diner she liked over chocolate milk and waffles. She put her fork down, looked at me, and asked me if it was her fault. I told her it was not. I told her that her father and I had failed at being married, but we would not fail at being her parents. She asked me if she could still go to horse camp in July. I told her she could. I told her I had already paid for it. She picked up her fork again very slowly and ate the rest of her waffles. She did not cry. She was 11, and she had already learned, in some way I still cannot name, that tears do not change the contract. That was the last time I cried about David for a long time. It was also the morning I understood that the only person who was going to make sure my daughter got what she had earned in this world was me. Now let me tell you about Vanessa Hart. The woman who would eventually sit in the front row seat I had paid for was the woman my ex-husband left me for, and I have spent 6 years learning exactly who she is. The divorce was finalized in November of 2019. David did not fight for custody. I want to be very clear about that because people have assumed over the years that he did. He did not. His lawyer told him in writing that given the text messages, the calendar invite, and the money he had moved from the joint account to pay for dinners with Vanessa in Boulder, his chances of walking away with anything close to 50% custody were very small. So he did not fight. He signed. He took his half of the equity, his half of the retirement account, and every other weekend and 1 Wednesday dinner a month. That is what the contract said. I want to tell you what that contract looked like in real life. In real life, David took Sophie to dinner on the 2nd Wednesday of every month, and he canceled 11 times in the first year. He was supposed to have her for the long weekend in October, and he called at 4 p.m. on Friday to say he had a work thing, and could he please drop her off early. He was supposed to call her every night he did not see her, and he did not. I have the call logs. I have them because the court order said he had to, and because I saved them the way I save everything, in a folder I labeled Dad. There's a separate folder for each year. Dad 2019, Dad 2020, Dad 2021, and so on. Inside each one, I keep the canceled check stubs, the receipts from the restaurants he said he was taking her to that he never did, the text messages where he asked to reschedule, and the photographs Sophie took of the empty seats at his table on his weekends. I do not keep them to be angry. I keep them because Sharon told me that one day I would need to show a judge that the pattern was not a pattern of mistakes. It was a pattern of choice. David and Vanessa married in the spring of 2020 in a small ceremony in Beaver Creek that I was not invited to. Sophie was not invited either. She was 14. She found out about it from a photograph that one of David's cousins posted on Facebook, and she called me from her friend's house, and she asked me why her father had not told her he was getting married. I did not have a good answer. I told her the truth, which was that I did not know. The receipts multiplied after the wedding. I added a 4th column to the notebook for what David had committed to and then reneged on. I have 4 years of that column filled in. The total at the bottom of the last page is 217 missed commitments. I will give you 3 of them because you need to understand what we were dealing with. The first was Sophie's 15th birthday. David had agreed, in writing, to take her to dinner at the restaurant she had chosen. He canceled at 3 p.m. on her birthday. He sent a text that said he was sorry, he had a work thing in Vail and he would make it up to her. He did not. The second was her junior prom. He had agreed to take her dress shopping with me. He did not show up. Sophie tried on 6 dresses by herself in a fitting room with a curtain that did not close, and I sat on the bench outside and held it shut with my hand. The third was her 18th birthday, the one I mentioned earlier, when he and his new wife flew to Cancun. He sent a text from the resort at 11:42 p.m. The text said, "Happy birthday, Soph. Dad loves you." I read it before she did. I put my phone down very carefully, and I went to the kitchen and I poured myself a glass of water. I did not drink it. I just held it. I had paid for every birthday since the divorce. I had paid for the restaurant on Sophie's 15th after he canceled. I had paid for the prom dress, the shoes, the manicure, the photos, the after party. I had paid for her senior photos, her class ring, her graduation announcements, and her cap and gown. I had paid for her college application fees, all 14 of them in cash, at the post office. I have the money order receipts in a folder I labeled school. I do not show those receipts to David. They are for me and for Sophie and for the day, if it ever comes, when I have to show a court what it looks like when one parent does the work and the other parent takes the picture. The night of the Cancun birthday, after Sophie had gone to bed, I opened the Sophie folder for the first time. I had started it 6 months earlier, in June, when I booked the venue for her graduation. I had not opened it since. I sat on the kitchen floor with the folder in my lap, and I read every receipt I had paid for in the last 6 years, and I added them up in the back of the notebook. The number was $41,862. That is what I had paid, on my own, to give my daughter a life her father kept promising and never delivered. I closed the folder. I went to bed. I did not sleep, but I went to bed. I want to walk you through what I did in June of 2023, because the person I was in June is the person who built the table I sat in May. The school auditorium holds about 900 people. The graduation ceremony in 2024 was scheduled for the last Friday in May at 4 p.m. The school sold 2 kinds of tickets. General admission was $6 each. Reserved seats in row A or row B were $15 each, and you picked your seat from a PDF the school published in April. I had a copy of that PDF on my desktop by the first week of June, 11 months before the ceremony, because I planned the table before I planned the meal. I had a meeting with the venue coordinator in person on a Tuesday morning in her office at the high school. Her name is Linda Park. She has worked at that school for 26 years. She shook my hand and offered me a chair. I told her I would like to reserve 4 seats in row A. She said the school usually did not allow outside reservation of the front row, but the district office had given her discretion for special family circumstances. I told her my circumstances were these. I was a single mother. My daughter had earned her place at the top of her class through 6 years of straight A's, 2 years of therapy, and one parent who had not shown up. I told her I would pay in cash, full price for all 4 seats, no discount. I told her I would also pay a small administrative fee in an envelope for the inconvenience of her looking the other way while I chose specific seats. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said yes. The 4 seats I chose were A1, A2, A3, and A4. I had paid for them in cash, in 20s, out of an envelope I had taken out of the bank the day before. Linda counted the money at her desk, gave me a handwritten receipt on a yellow Post-it note, and said she would see me in May. I kept the Post-it. It is in the Sophie folder, in the plastic sleeve at the front, next to the printed PDF of the seating chart with 4 red circles drawn around the 4 seat numbers. The most important $120 I have ever spent. I did not invite David. I sent an email on June 15th to his work address and to his personal address, copying Sharon. The email was 3 lines long, The first said the graduation would be on May 31st at 4 p.m. at the school auditorium. The second said I had reserved 4 seats in row A and that I was not in a position to add any more. The third said I hoped he and Vanessa would have a wonderful summer and that I looked forward to seeing him at Sophie's college orientation in the fall. He did not reply. He never replies to emails. He replies to text messages, when he replies at all, and only when the text is about money. I sent the email anyway because Sharon told me that one day the paper trail would matter. The next 11 months were a series of small, careful, paid-for decisions. I booked the catering in July. I booked the photographer in August, a woman named Rachel who had shot Sophie's senior photos. I ordered the flowers in February, white peonies, 200 stems. I ordered the cake in March, 4 tiers, with a small gold S on the top tier. I ordered Sophie's dress in January, ivory silk, off the shoulder. I paid for the dress in 2 installments. I paid for the alterations in cash. I paid for the shoes, the jewelry, the manicure, the hair appointment. I did not pay for any of these things because I wanted my daughter to be spoiled. I paid for them because if I did not, no one would. I have the receipts for every one of them in the Sophie folder in chronological order. By the end of April, the folder was 3 inches thick. By the middle of May, I had the seating chart memorized. My mother was in A2. My brother Greg was in A3. Camille was in A4. I was in A1 in the seat I had paid for in cash, 11 months earlier, with a post-it note to prove it. David's name was not on that chart. Vanessa's name was not on that chart. If either of them tried to sit in any of those 4 seats on May 31st, I would have a piece of yellow paper in my bag that said, in Linda Park's handwriting, that those seats belonged to me. I want to tell you about the first time I met Vanessa Hart in person, because the woman who would later sit in my seat is not the woman I had been picturing for 6 years. It was at Sophie's winter choir concert in December of 2022. I was sitting in row F near the back by myself with my coat on my lap because I had not been able to get a closer seat. I had not tried to get a closer seat. I had not wanted to make a scene. Sophie was 17 and she had asked me very specifically not to sit in the front row. She said the front row was for grandparents. I respected that. So I sat in row F and I watched my daughter sing a piece from a movie she loved in a clear voice, with her hands held together in front of her, the way she did when she was concentrating. David was not at the concert. He was in Cancun again, this time with Vanessa, for their 2nd wedding anniversary. I learned this the next day, when Sophie told me on the phone, between sobs, that her father had posted a photograph of the 2 of them on a beach, with a caption that read, 2 years, married to my best friend, and that one of Sophie's friends had screenshotted it and sent it to her in the middle of the night. I did not say anything. I let her cry. I told her I loved her. I told her that the next concert I would be in the front row. She said, please, Mom, not the front row. I told her I would sit in row D, the 2nd row, and that she could not stop me. She laughed a little between the crying. That was the only good thing that came out of that night. I met Vanessa in the lobby after the concert. I was waiting for Sophie by the side door of the auditorium holding her coat. Vanessa walked up to me with a paper cup of cider in one hand and her phone in the other. She had long dark hair, a black dress, and a smile that was wide enough to be a photograph. She said very brightly, "You must be Sophie's mom. David has told me so much about you." I said, "Hello, Vanessa." She said, "Oh, you know my name." I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "That is so sweet of you to come tonight." I said, "She is my daughter. Where else would I be?" She tilted her head, just a little, the way people do when they're deciding whether to keep talking. Then she said, "Well, I am sure Sophie is grateful to have you both here tonight." I said, "You are not both." "David is in Cancun." She blinked. She did not look away. She said, "Well, he is thinking of you both, I am sure." I said, "Yes, that is exactly what a screenshot from a beach looks like." She left after that. She walked back across the lobby to a group of women I did not know, all of them in dark dresses, all of them holding paper cups. I did not see her again that night. I did, however, do 2 things. The first was that I made a note in my phone, dated and timed, of what she had said and what I had said. The second was that I went home and I looked her up on every social media platform I could find. She had 3,412 followers on Instagram. She posted on average twice a day. Photographs of her dog, her coffee, her outfits, and herself at events she had not been invited to until she had invited herself. She was very good at being in pictures. She was less good at being in rooms. That was the moment I understood what I was dealing with. Vanessa was not a threat in the way I had been afraid of. She was not going to take my daughter from me. She was not going to convince David to stop being who he was. She was going to do something much more dangerous. She was going to keep inserting herself into the photographs of my daughter's life, slowly, until the photographs looked like they belonged to her. I had seen it happen to other women in other families. The stepmother who shows up to the parent-teacher conference, the stepmother who plans the birthday party, the stepmother who picks the dress. None of it is malicious. None of it is even deliberate most of the time. It is just a woman who does not understand that the seat she's sitting in was paid for by someone else. I started a new file in the Sophie folder. I called it Vanessa. Inside it, I put the screenshots from her social media accounts, the dates of the events she had attended without an invitation, the photographs she had posted that included Sophie, and a log of every text and email David had sent me in the last year that mentioned her by name. I added to it every week. I did not add to it to be angry. I added to it because Sharon told me that the most dangerous woman in a custody situation is not the one who fights you. It is the one who simply keeps showing up. There's a letter in the Sophie folder that I have not signed yet. It has been in the folder since the first week of October, when Sharon wrote it out on her letterhead in her very particular handwriting with a fountain pen she keeps in her pocketbook. The letter is 3 pages long. The first page is a summary of the case for modification of the parenting plan. The second page is a list of 27 specific incidents from the last 24 months in which David failed to exercise his court-ordered time with Sophie, each one tied to a date, a text message, and a witness. The third page is the request. It asks the court to terminate David's parental rights or, in the alternative, to reduce his visitation to 1 supervised visit per month. I want to tell you what the third page says. In Sharon's words, the third page says that the father has demonstrated a consistent pattern of choosing his new spouse and his new lifestyle over the welfare of his minor child, and that any further contact between the father and the child is reasonably likely to cause the child continued and substantial emotional harm. It says that the mother has borne 100% of the financial and emotional responsibility for the child since the divorce. It says very calmly that if the father wishes to contest any of these facts, he is welcome to do so in open court. I have not signed the letter. I have carried it in the Sophie folder for 8 months behind the post-it note from Linda Park. I take it out every now and then, and I read it. I read it because Sharon is very good at her job, and because the letter is, in many ways, the most beautiful thing anyone has ever written about me. It is the only document in the world that says, in legal language, what I have been saying to David for 6 years, which is that I have been doing the work and he has been taking the picture. I have not signed it because I have not needed to. David has not done anything in the last 8 months that would force me to escalate. He has been calling Sophie once a week. He has been paying his child support on time after a brief conversation with Sharon in January in which Sharon explained very patiently what would happen to his license if he did not. He has even shown up 3 weekends in a row for his court-ordered Wednesdays. I have made a note of that in the notebook in the second column under what he actually did. But the letter is there. It is in the folder. It has been signed by Sharon. It is dated October 4th. It is waiting for me to add my signature at the bottom of the third page in the line above the words, mother of the minor child. The line is printed in italics. The line is exactly 2.5 inches long. I have measured it. I do not know why I measured it. I think I measured it because measuring things is how I keep myself from being afraid of them. I am the kind of woman who knows the size of every important thing in her life. I asked Sophie about the letter in March. We were in the car on the way home from a college visit. She was in the passenger seat with her feet up on the dashboard, which I usually do not allow. I let her that day because we were having a real conversation. I told her there was a letter. I told her what the letter said. I told her that I had not signed it, and that I would not sign it without her permission, and that if she asked me not to, I would put the letter back in the folder and I would never take it out again. She did not say anything for a long time. She watched the highway. Then she said, very quietly, "Mom, I do not need him to disappear. I just need him to be there." I said, "Okay, I will not sign the letter." She said, "Thank you." She said, "But if he does anything else, anything at all, you can sign it." I said, "Okay. I have not signed it, and I will not sign it unless he gives me a reason. The reason when it comes will not be about him. It will be about the woman he married. It will be about the day she tries to sit in the front row of our daughter's graduation, in the seat I have paid for, in cash, 11 months early, with a yellow post-it note to prove it. The week before the graduation was, by my standards, almost peaceful. Sophie had her final dress fitting on the Monday, her final choir rehearsal on Tuesday, her final college meeting on Wednesday, her hair appointment on Thursday, and her manicure on Friday. She did all of these things with the same calm, focused attention she had given to every project she had ever undertaken since she was 11. She did not, at any point in that week, mention her father. I did not either. We had an agreement, unspoken, that the week was hers and that the man who was supposed to be in Cancun would not be allowed to enter the room. I spent the week in the Sophie folder. I confirmed the catering count on Monday, the photographer on Tuesday, the flowers on Wednesday, the cake on Thursday, and the venue walkthrough with Linda on Friday afternoon, in person, in her office. She had the 4 red circles drawn on the seating chart, and she had the post-it note I had given her, with my name and my phone number, taped to the corner of her desk. She asked me very quietly if I expected any trouble. I told her I did not know. She told me, very kindly, that if anyone tried to sit in seats, A1 through A4, without a ticket bearing the matching name, she would personally escort them to the back of the auditorium. She said, "Do not thank me. I have been doing this for 26 years, and I have seen what you have done for yours." David called me on Tuesday night at 9:47 p.m. I knew it was him before I picked up because the number was his and the time was late, and David only calls after 9 when he's about to do something he should not have done. I let it ring 3 times. He said, "Hey, Ivy." He said, "I wanted to talk to you about graduation." He said, "Vanessa and I have decided to come." I did not say anything. He said, "We have changed our minds about the Mexico trip. We thought it would be more meaningful to be there for Sophie's graduation." I said, "When did you decide this?" He said, "Today." I said, "Did Sophie ask you to come?" He said, "No, but we thought it would be a nice surprise." I said, "David, the surprise is that you are telling me 10 days before the event that the woman you married to replace me is going to sit in the front row of my daughter's graduation." He said, "Ivy, that is not fair." I said, "That is exactly what it is." He said, "We are coming anyway." I said, "Fine, you and Vanessa are welcome to attend in seats you purchased from the school, in row D or below." He said, "What about row A?" I said, "Row A is full." He said, "By who?" I said, "By the people who earned those seats." He said, "Ivy, that is not reasonable." I said, "You told me in writing on April 19th that you would not be attending." He said, "That was before we changed our minds." I said, "I have that text message, David." He said, "Vanessa and I think Sophie would want us there." I said, "I will ask Sophie, but you will sit in row D or below regardless." He said, "That is unreasonable." I said, "That is the only invitation you have." He said, "Fine." He said, "We will see you on May 31st. I said, "You will see Sophie's name on the program." He hung up first. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. I had the text message, dated April 19th, that said he and Vanessa would not be attending. I had it saved in a folder labeled Promises. I had it printed in a plastic sleeve with the date and time written in black marker. I had a copy of it in the Sophie folder and a copy of it in the file I had labeled School, and a copy of it on my desk at work. One copy is never enough. I went upstairs. I opened Sophie's door, very quietly. She was asleep, with the flashlight on under the covers again, the way she had been when she was 11. I watched her breathe for a moment. I went back downstairs. I called Sharon. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Sharon, he is coming." She said, "I know. His lawyer just called me." I said, "What did you say?" I said, "If he and his wife attempt to sit in any of the 4 seats in row A, his lawyer will be receiving a copy of the letter you have not yet signed by noon the next day." I said, "What did his lawyer say?" She said, "He said he would advise his client accordingly." I said, "So they are coming?" She said, "Yes." She said, "Are you sure you do not want to sign the letter now?" I said, "No. I made Sophie a promise. I will not sign it unless they do something to her on that day." She said, "Okay, I will be there." I said, "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me." I went to bed. I did not sleep, but I went to bed. I woke up on May 31st at 5:31 a.m. I had set my alarm for 5:45, but I was already awake, and I had been for at least an hour, the way you are awake the morning of something you have been waiting for your whole life. I lay in bed for a few minutes. I looked at the ceiling. I did not think about David. I did not think about Vanessa. I thought about Sophie, and about the morning she was born, and about the way the nurse had laid her on my chest. I thought about the way she had held my hand on her first day of kindergarten, and the way she had let go of it at the school door. I thought about every parent-teacher conference I had ever attended, alone, and every school play I had ever watched from row F, and every birthday I had ever paid for, alone. Then I got out of bed, and I made coffee. Sophie was awake when I went downstairs. She was sitting at the kitchen counter in a t-shirt and sweatpants, eating a bowl of cereal with her hair up in a clip. She looked up when I came in. She said, "Hi, Mom." I said, "Good morning, baby." She said, "What if I trip?" I said, "You will not trip." She said, "What if my voice cracks?" I said, "It will not crack." She said, "What if Dad is there?" I said, "Then he is there and you walk across the stage anyway." She said, "What if Vanessa is there?" I said, "Then Vanessa is there and you walk across the stage anyway." She put her spoon down. She said, "Mom, I do not want them in our row." I said, "They will not be in our row." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I paid for our row." She nodded. She said, "Okay, I trust you." I said, "I know." "Finish your cereal," she did. My mother arrived at 11 with Greg in a car she had borrowed from a neighbor. She wore a blue dress and a small hat with a feather, and she had a tissue in her sleeve, the way she always does at important events. Greg wore a blazer that did not quite fit him. I kissed her. She held my face in her hands. She said, "How is Sophie?" I said, "She is ready." She said, "How are you?" I said, "I am ready." She did not ask me what I meant. She had been my mother for 41 years. Camille arrived at noon in the truck she had driven from Kansas with a card and a small gift bag. She hugged me at the door. She said, "I cannot believe she's 18. I said, "Neither can I." She said, "Where do I sit?" I said, "You are an A4. She said, "I have never sat in the front row of anything." I said, "You have now." She said, "Are they coming?" I said, "They have said they are coming." She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I am going to sit in A1 in the seat I paid for." She said, "And if they try to take it?" I said, "Linda Park will ask them to leave." Camille nodded. She said, "You are terrifying." I said, "Thank you." Sophie came down the stairs at 1 p.m. She was wearing the ivory silk dress. Her hair was down in soft waves the way she had wanted. The slit was exactly where she had asked for it. She had a small gold locket around her neck that had belonged to my grandmother. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, and we did not say anything for a long time. Then I said, "You look like your grandmother." She said, "Thank you, Mom." She said, "It is time, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, it is time." We left the house at 2:15. I drove. Sophie sat in the front seat, in the dress, with her graduation cap on her lap. She did not put it on. She held it in her lap the way she had held her baby blanket when she was small, with both hands. The drive to the school took 23 minutes. We did not speak. I had a small recorder in my bag with a fresh battery. I had the Post-it note in the front pocket. I had my phone in my back pocket. I had the keys to the car in my hand. I was, by every reasonable measure, the most prepared woman in the state of Colorado. I was also terrified. We arrived at the school at 2:40. Sophie went to the green room to line up with her classmates. I kissed her on the forehead. I said, "I will be in the front row." She said, "I know." She said, "Mom." I said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you for paying for everything." I said, "You are welcome." She walked away. I watched her until she turned the corner. Then I walked toward the auditorium doors. The doors opened at 3:30. I showed my ticket to the head usher, a girl I did not know who looked at the seat number, looked at the chart, and waved me through. I walked down the center aisle. I passed row F, where I had sat alone for the winter choir concert. I passed row D, where I had sat alone for the parent-teacher night. I reached row A. I looked at seat 1. There was a woman in it. She was wearing a cream-colored dress with a large designer handbag on the seat beside her. She had a small fascinator in her hair, the kind of thing you wear to a wedding, not a graduation. She had a program in her lap, open to the page with Sophie's name on it. She had crossed her legs. She was looking at her phone. She was Vanessa Hart. I stood in the aisle for a moment. I did not say anything. I looked at the seat. I looked at the handbag. I looked at the program. I looked at the woman's face, the same face I had seen in the lobby at the winter concert, the same face I had been looking at for 6 years. I did not feel what I thought I would feel. I did not feel anger. I felt a kind of cold, clear precision, the way you feel when you have been preparing for something for a long time and it has finally arrived. I said, "Excuse me." Vanessa looked up. She said, "Oh." She said, "Hi, Ivy." I said, "Hello, Vanessa." She said, "David said I could sit here." I said, "David does not own this seat." She said, "He said it would be fine." I said, "I am sorry, but it is not fine." I said, "This is my seat." I said, "I paid for it." She said, paid for it. I said, yes. She said, well, we got here first. I said, the seat is not first come, first served. I said, the seat is reserved. I said, in writing. She said, I do not think that is right. I said, I do. I opened my bag. I took out the Post-it note. I held it up between two fingers. Vanessa looked at it. I said, do you see this? She said, what is that? I said, this is a handwritten receipt. Signed by Linda Park, the venue coordinator, dated June 12th of last year. It says that I have reserved 4 seats in row A, seats 1 through 4, for the graduation ceremony. It says that those seats belong to me and to the 3 guests I have designated. She said, I do not think that is how this works. I said, it is exactly how this works. She looked at the Post-it. She said, I do not want to make a scene. I said, you are not making a scene, Vanessa. I am. She said, David is going to be upset. I said, David has been upset for 6 years. He will survive this one. She said, I cannot believe you are doing this. I said, I cannot believe you are sitting in my seat. She said, this is Sophie's graduation. I said, yes, it is. And that is why the seat is mine. Linda Park appeared, as if she had been waiting for the moment. She had been waiting for the moment. She walked up the aisle in a navy blazer with a small earpiece in her ear and a clipboard in her hand. She said very quietly, ladies, is there a problem? I said, yes, there is a problem. This woman is in my seat. Linda looked at the Post-it. She looked at her own copy in the clipboard. She said, ma'am, this seat is reserved. You are welcome to find another seat in the auditorium. There are still seats available in row D, row E, and row F. Vanessa said, I do not want to sit in row D. Linda said, that is the only seat I have for you. Vanessa said, this is a public school. Linda said, yes, and we are following our own policy. Vanessa stood up. She picked up her handbag. She did not look at me. She walked back up the aisle, past row B, past row C, past row D, all the way to the back of the auditorium. She did not run. She did not cry. She sat down in a seat in row G near the side door, and she opened her phone, and she did not look up again. I sat down in A1. I put the Post-it note back in the front pocket of my bag. I put my bag on the floor between my feet. I looked at the stage. I waited for my daughter's name to be called in the seat I had paid for in cash, 12 months earlier, with a yellow Post-it note to prove it. The graduation lasted 93 minutes. I sat in A1 the entire time. My mother was in A2. Greg was in A3. Camille was in A4. I watched my daughter walk across the stage in her ivory dress, accept her diploma from the principal, shake his hand, and walk back to her seat in the choir section. Her name was called Sophie Louise Reyes, and the auditorium filled with applause, and I clapped until my hands were sore, and I did not look back at row G. I did not need to. I had already won. Sophie's name was on the program. Sophie's name was on the diploma. Sophie's name was on the only seat that mattered. I learned what was in the handbag 3 days later. A woman named Rachel, who's a friend of mine, sent me a direct message on Instagram. Rachel had worked for a marketing agency that had done social media work for the same real estate firm that employed Vanessa. Rachel had seen Vanessa on the morning of the graduation in the lobby with a small camera mounted on the strap of her handbag. The camera was pointed forward. The camera was recording. The handbag was not a handbag. It was a rig. Vanessa had been planning for at least 2 weeks to record herself in row A at the graduation and to post the footage on her account, captioned with some version of stepmom moment, to claim the public narrative of our family before I could. She had bought the camera on Amazon. She had bought the strap on Etsy. She had run a small test from the back of an Uber on May 29th, and she had not thought to delete the test footage from the cloud. Rachel had seen the test footage. Rachel had sent me a copy. I sat at my kitchen counter on June 3rd, and I watched the test footage 3 times. In the footage, Vanessa is sitting in the back of an Uber, holding her handbag on her lap, looking at the camera and saying, in a clear voice, that she is excited for the weekend, that she is going to be in the front row for her stepdaughter's graduation, that she has been waiting for this moment for a long time, and that she's going to make sure David's daughter knows she has a family now. She said it, knowing the camera was recording, and knowing the recording would end up, by her own plan, on the open internet. I called Sharon. I sent her the footage. I told her I wanted to file the letter. She said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I am sure." She said, "Okay." I said, "Do not give his lawyer a warning." She said, "Ivy." I said, "Do not give his lawyer a warning." She said, "Okay." We did not. On June 5th, Sharon filed the letter with the court. On June 5th, David received, by certified mail, a copy of the request to terminate his parental rights, with the 27 incidents attached, with the receipts attached, with the text messages attached, with the screenshots from Vanessa's social media attached, and with the test footage from the Uber, timestamped and notarized, attached as Exhibit 28. He called me that night. I did not pick up. He texted me. The text said, "What did you do?" I did not reply. He texted me again. The text said, "Vanessa is a mess." I did not reply. He texted me a third time. The text said, "This is going to ruin her." I did not reply. I did, however, take a screenshot of all 3 texts. I added them to the Sophie folder. I wrote the date on the plastic sleeve in black marker. Then I closed the folder and I put it back in the closet and I went to bed. What I did not know when I went to bed that night was that Vanessa had been planning, since March, to make a public claim on my daughter's life. She had been working on a small website, in secret, called the Reyes Heart Family, with a domain she had bought in February. She had been writing posts on it, under a fake name that described our family as a blended success story. She had been planning to launch the site on the evening of the graduation, with the front row video as the centerpiece. She had a launch announcement ready to go on 3 different platforms. She had told her friends, in a group chat I had never seen, that she was going to surprise David and Sophie with a new public chapter for the family. She had not asked David. She had not asked Sophie. She had not, in any of these plans, asked me. It is now 7 months later. Sophie is at college. She's studying psychology, and she's on the dean's list, and she calls me every Sunday at 6 p.m., with a precision that I find very comforting. She has a small photograph on her desk of the 2 of us at her graduation, taken by the photographer I had paid for. In the photograph, I am in the front row, in the seat I had paid for, and she is on the stage, in the ivory dress, with her diploma in her hand. We are the only 2 people in the photograph who are smiling. David and Vanessa are no longer together. Vanessa's website, the one she had been planning to launch on the night of the graduation, was never launched. The marketing agency that had done her social media work released a public statement disavowing her conduct. The real estate firm that employed her terminated her employment in October. The Uber footage was, by November, shared with a reporter at the Denver Post, and then with Vanessa herself, who, by December, had moved back to our parents' house in Tucson. David, by January, had filed a motion to modify the parenting plan, on the grounds that the original letter had been filed in retaliation for his attendance at the graduation. The motion was denied. The case for termination of his parental rights is still pending. I am still not signing the letter. Sophie asked me not to, and I have not. I am telling you this story now, in February of 2025, because I think it is finished. The receipts are still in the Sophie folder, in the closet, in the plastic sleeves with the dates in black marker. The folder is 2 inches thicker than it was in June. I open it when Sophie calls on Sunday, and I open it when I cannot sleep, which is most nights. The answer to what it cost me to give my daughter the front row is $41,862, and 6 years of careful, documented, paid-for work, and 1 yellow post-it note and 1 signature I have not yet given. I have learned a few things in the 7 months since the graduation. The first is that revenge, when it works, is not loud. It is the slow, careful, boring work of building a life so thoroughly documented that no one, not your ex-husband, not his new wife, not even a judge, can pretend that what you did for your child did not happen. The second is that the woman who sat in your seat will eventually be removed from it, not by you, but by the receipt you paid for. 11 months earlier, in cash, with a yellow post-it note to prove it. The third is that your daughter will grow up and call you on Sundays and tell you that she remembers the front row and that you were the first face she saw, and that the woman who tried to take it from her is a story she tells her roommates. The way other people tell stories about their childhoods. She is proud of you. She has always been proud of you. Thank you for listening to this story. I am glad you stayed until the end, and I am especially glad that you stayed long enough to hear about the photograph, because the photograph is the ending I never expected to have. What I have instead of a neat ending is that photograph. The one on her desk. The one of the 2 of us, in the front row and on the stage, in the auditorium where I had paid, in cash, 11 months earlier, for the only seat that mattered. If you take one thing from this story, take this. Pay for the seat. Pay for it in cash. Pay for it with a yellow post-it note. Pay for it so that, on the day your daughter's name is called, you can be the first face she sees, and no one, no matter how bright their handbag is, can take that from you. I am going to step aside now, and let our host close this one out. Thank you, from the bottom of my very organized heart. And that, friends, is where I come back in. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the very end. If this story moved you, please consider leaving a like on this video. It is a small thing, but it helps the channel more than you know. If you are not yet subscribed, the button is right below this video, and I would love to see you back here next week. We tell these stories so that the people in them do not have to be alone. Hit the bell so you never miss one. Leave me a comment and tell me what part of Ivy's story you will remember the most. We will see you next week. Take care of yourselves, pay for the seat, and we will see you soon.